Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I am so excited about today's episode because I feel like everybody, of course, wants to talk about AI in all the different ways and all the ramifications inside of our businesses and inside of our economy and inside the world and inside our personal lives. But the one area where people are not talking about the powers of AI is outside of the world of software. When we cross into hardware, when we cross into our physical spaces, when we cross into tangible things, we have found an incredible pioneer and innovator, and he just so happens to be a fellow entrepreneur, to break down and reveal so much to us from inside that world. So let me introduce you to our guest today, and the very brilliant Bobby Ng. Bobby is the founder of Transfigure, and at Transfigure, they create AI that makes physical stuff. You might be thinking, how the heck do they do that? By giving AI the power to create real parts in the physical 3D world, Transfigure accelerates hardware development by letting humans focus on the most invaluable part of hardware development, solving problems creatively. Bobby has such a cool background that I'm not even going to tease in this intro because I'm so excited for him to take us on every step of his journey. We are all going to learn a lot from him today. I think he's going to open our eyes to what the future looks like, and I think we'll be surprised that the future, of course, is now. So I'm excited about this one. Let's dive straight into my interview with Bobby Ng. All right, Bobby, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. I'm really happy to be here speaking with you.
Heck yeah, I'm so excited to geek out about all the cool things that you are into and all the things that you have built. But before we do that, I want to put the spotlight on you. Take us beyond the bio. Who's Bobby? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah, well, I'll give the short version first, and then there's a lot of more details that I'm sure we'll go over. But, I've spent over 20 years in the trenches of hardware engineering. I started my career at Honda R&D, working on such vehicles as Acura MDX, Honda Odyssey, Pilot, Ridgeline, all the North American models. I took the leap of faith, went to Tesla. This is over 13, 14 years ago now, and worked on electric drivetrain there. And that was how I first kind of wet my feet in Silicon Valley. Later, I went to Zoox, where I worked on robotaxis, Archer Aviation, where I worked on eVTOL aircraft. And most recently, I have been working on electrified trailers, of all things. You wouldn't think you could put battery and motor on a tractor trailer, but indeed it is possible, and we save a lot of fuel doing that. But now I've decided, now is the time to start an AI company that makes physical stuff, and I'm happy to talk through a little bit more of that with you today.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to go there. It's so hard for me to not jump straight into all the things that you're doing with Transfigure, but you're right. Even just in your abridged bio, there's so many launch points that I want to jump from. And first and foremost, I've got to bring this to the top of today's episode, is you must have a very interesting perception of the future because you've always worked on very future-facing technologies. Listeners know that I'm a bit of a Tesla fanboy. Every single time I sit in my car and I just hit that button, start FSD. It's unbelievable to me. And any passenger who's never experienced the beauty of Tesla's FSD technology, which stands for full self-drive for people who aren't aware, they don't realize. They think that that's futuristic, that I just kind of sit there and I fold my arms and the steering wheel does its thing, the pedal does its things. Bobby, people think that's the future. They don't realize it's today. Talk to me about your perception of what is the future when people talk about that, because I feel like you're operating in the future already.
Yeah, I think that there were, just to go back to the history of Tesla a little bit, and even I joining in 2012 or 2013, I wasn't that early. Tesla had been around since like 2005 or something like that. So back in college, as a college student, I started a college design competition team at my alma mater, Johns Hopkins University. And so I was always since that point, I'd always been into cars, always wanted to work in the automotive industry. Around 2004, 2005, there's Tesla, and they've got this thing called the Roadster, right? And you're like, wow, what the heck is that thing? Like, that seems pretty futuristic. Like, it's not the first electric vehicle, but it was the first kind of cool one, kind of going mainstream. And so but even back then, it was like hard to understand like where's the world going to go with electric vehicles. But I think it takes a very future-minded person that can squint really hard and see the future, to really just like chart a path on how to get there. And so when I joined Tesla a long time ago, there was still everybody's like doubting Tesla. Tesla's about to go bankrupt every quarter. Every quarter, you got to save money, not pay some bills. Thankfully, all the employees I think would always get paid, but not pay some bills and just try to scrape by. But with enough perseverance and enough speed, and especially speed, I think is like the number one reason why Tesla actually succeeded. Enough perseverance and speed can kind of get you to the end point. What I see for Transfigure, to talk a little bit about my company, is I'm squinting pretty hard to see the future of what AI will allow mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, really design engineers to do to accelerate the production of hardware around the world. We spend a lot of time as engineers clicking a mouse, typing on a keyboard, just like software engineers used to do. But software engineers have AI. They have a lot of tools now to help them do their job. Mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, people that design CAD models, PCBA, wire harnesses, like these people we have almost no help. So that's why I started Transfigure, was to, bring this to fruition and create a world where, computers actually do a lot of this, you call it easy work, for humans. And then humans get to do the very difficult, underappreciated work of like thinking very creatively about how to fix problems. So that's the future of design. And then Transfigure is going to be part of that.
Yeah, I love that. I want to go deeper into the world of Transfigure because, Bobby, part of my role as the host of this show is to just have my everyday person hat on and imagine what listeners might be thinking. And Bobby, if they hear that tagline of creating AI that makes physical stuff, I think the most normal thing that everyday people we can relate to is, well, the only thing I can think of that makes physical stuff is 3D printing. Talk to us about what this actually looks like and how it's kind of that next step from 3D printing.
Yeah, so now we get to really get into the meat and potatoes of why Transfigure is very special and why what we're doing it sets us apart from the pack. We're not the only ones working on this so-called AI CAD, but I think the way that we've approached the problem is pretty unique. So, just to paint the picture of what is the problem that we're solving, a lot of famous people now, like Jensen Huang and so on, are saying like 50% of the world's GDP is physical stuff. I like to think that I said that first because I put it on my website first before he said it. But, it's true. 50% of the world's GDP is or relies on physical stuff. It's not just cars. It's not just another iPhone or another Tesla. It's actually really everything else. Really everything that is created that we use day to day. It's the table desk that you're standing at. It's the chair that I'm sitting on. It's all the stuff, for the audience, it's all the stuff in your room. It's all the stuff in your house. If it's been mass produced in a factory somewhere, very likely in China or overseas, there is a 3D design behind that, or at the very least, like a 2D drawing behind it. And these things are created such that a robot or a piece of manufacturing equipment can take a 3D CAD file that we call a step file. And these step files are very significant. This is what governs the design of everything around all physical objects around the world have a step file. These things go into NC programming software. Then they get put into the actual machine as G code, and then they get cut out of a block of aluminum, or they get put on a laser cutter and cut out of cut with lasers or water jet, and then you even press brake, stamping, injection molding, casting, forging. The list goes on. Like the list of things that are made on mass production equipment that rely on 3D CAD step files is practically everything that you touch that is man-made or human design. So what Transfigure stands to do is by making it very easy to go from the concept to the step file, we actually unlock the ability for a variety of things to be done, like improve, production at machine shops, improve production at factories, reduce the amount of time it takes to bring products to fruition and sold in the marketplace. So it's more than just 3D printing. 3D printing can be done with so-called mesh files. We're actually creating step files that are B-reps. B-reps are like a mathematically pure surface. These can be used for things like injection molding, stamping, laser cutting, and such. that these mesh files that 3D printers can accept, they could deal with that stuff as well. But we're actually creating a very valuable file format to allow everything in the world to be created.
Bobby, it's so cool hearing the way that you articulate that. And I would imagine that listeners' minds are already starting to race with all of the doors that are open to just everyday people. I will be the first to confess that I think we all had classmates in high school and in college that got into CAD. And those of us who did not look at them and we think, holy cow, they literally can just make something up. They can imagine something and turn it into a reality thanks to this amazing software. But they have always been the drivers of it. And so what I'm hearing you say today is that it's going to open up the doors to so many people who don't have that CAD sort of background. My question to you, and I'm going to use an example that hopefully doesn't get us into trouble because it'll probably push the limits of what you and I know about. Let's use a microphone, for example. I'm talking into a microphone right now, and it has a certain shape and it has a certain way that they've built this microphone. And it makes me realize I could probably watch enough YouTube videos and figure out CAD to design a microphone. But what I cannot fake and what I cannot design is the method behind the madness, is I don't understand so many of the intricacies as to why existing microphones are designed this way, why the shape, why the texture, why the materials, why the everything. So Bobby, if you take us, and I know it's a very loaded question, but if you take us from start to finish about physical things, what are those steps? And then where does Transfigure solve those problems along the way?
Yeah, that is the truly like $1 trillion market that we're looking at. You brought up a great example of a microphone, and it so happens I actually worked for the professor back at Johns Hopkins, James West. He invented the electret microphone, and I think about that every time I look at a microphone. Like, there is a little foil in there that is charged, and it's like doing its electron thing and creating charge and making sound. So, just a cool side. At Johns Hopkins, like, I started my career in designing a Baja vehicle. Later at Honda, I worked on cars, worked on batteries at Tesla, and so on. But so much of that human effort, you're right, goes into just clicking to create on the screen. But a lot of the value that an engineer brings to the table is not in clicking a mouse, being very good at clicking, or being very good at typing very fast on a keyboard. It's really in the creative aspect of how you fit parts together, how parts interact, how do you create, not just one part, but like an assembly of parts, like a microphone. You brought up a very good point of what's inside a microphone, generally speaking, how it generally functions, but do you really have to go and design every single part of it yourself if you already have a lot of experience, on say training data? Say you treat the problem of AI CAD a little bit more from a human perspective. So, engineers have spent years, decades, centuries, maybe a cumulative millennia in front of computers designing cars. What's to say that, an AI that has all that same information of training data can't also understand how to then design every part of a car? On our website, you would see a video of someone drawing a sketch of a car on a napkin. They take a photo of it with their phone, goes into AI inference, and the AI model, having been trained on a cumulative millennia of human effort of engineering of a car, understands that a car is not just a shell. It's actually got wheels. It has tires. It has an engine. It has seats. It has a steering wheel if it's human driven. So all these things are known. And as an engineer trained in the art of car design, I guess for most of my career, I indeed could design every part on a car and at some point get it to work. It would probably take me 1 million years of my own time, if it was just me. But then we just take that same type of effort and we parallelize it across a rather massive amount of AI compute. And, what's to say, without all the training data, with all the training data that's available of how to design a car, then AI couldn't do the same thing. The key that we're unlocking with Transfigure is the very first step of giving an AI model the ability to create spatially in 3D with a step file. And again, these step files kind of form the backbone for everything else that we create, whether it's PCBAs, wire harnesses, complex assemblies, like multi-part assemblies. Because once we give AI the power to actually create parts in the physical space, then we're starting to get into Skynet and Terminator. That's when we have to be a little bit careful.
Yeah, and you brought up such an interesting consideration that I actually hadn't thought of prior to you and I hitting record together is training data. I think it's something that we all take for granted when we use any large language model. Pick your poison. We all have different preferences and they're all good at different things. But I think as a society, we inherently, and obviously in a very simple way, we inherently understand how LLMs like ChatGPT have been trained. Of course, they've scraped the internet. They have read every user forum ever. They have consumed so many books that are out there in the public domain. There's so much training data that they have consumed. Bobby, when it comes to Transfigure, how the heck do you even begin to train an AI on things in our physical spaces, on actual tangible things?
I love that question because this really gets into one of our, I wouldn't say it's a moat, but it is definitely a part of what makes Transfigure special. So there are open source data sets for training such models. There's ABC data set. There's some from, which is something from NYU. There's, other ones that are kind of compiled by Autodesk. If you go out and look for a bunch of free data, you're going to get what you pay for, which is not a whole lot. What I mean by that is, for the engineers, CAD engineers out there that like to tinker with 3D printing and stuff, you might go to GrabCAD. You might use Onshape, Thingiverse. There's a number of places you go to get free 3D CAD models. Yes, you could download all of them. At some point they might just shut you down if you don't have API. But even with an API key or a way to API into, Onshape or something like that, you're only gonna get like 1,000 requests per week, and you're pretty limited. Your ability to grab all that stuff for free off the internet. It's not quite like grabbing all the news articles or grabbing every Twitter feed. These things tend to be like fairly protected. It's someone's IP. Like literally, someone spent some time creating this, and generally speaking, they want to protect it if it is valuable. So when you go out and get a bunch of free data from the internet, you're getting a lot of just junk. It's a lot of junk. It's either like very simple shapes or rather overcomplicated stuff that someone stole from someone else and put it into GrabCAD. You get such a wide variety of stuff that ends up not being very useful for the task of creating useful parts. So what we're doing at Transfigure is our ability to create 3D data that an engineer is proud of and that, say, a factory can actually produce. These are the two things that actually make our ability to generate our own synthetic training data one of the ways that we're going to win. As it turns out, CAD data is all synthetic anyway. So your ability to parametrically generate as much synthetic training data as you want to fulfill a certain task, whether it's like very simple parts or very complex parts, or really like fulfilling a whole distribution of parts in between simple and complex. That is one of the things that we do really well. We're not a traditional software company run by, I'd say like Berkeley or Davis dropouts. Like my coworker and I, we spent years in the industry designing real parts, sending real parts to factories to get produced, and seeing the pain and feeling the pain of producing real parts makes you really appreciate the detail that has to go into a CAD design that is actually fit for production. And so that's a very important part of what we do, is we're making 3D models that are fit for production, not something that you'd only put on your 3D printer, but something that could go into like a stamping die or injection molding and things of that nature. So stuff people are willing to pay for. I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, and I think that's important because you called out all those 3D printing repositories where you can download free files, and everyone talks about, oh my gosh, look at this really cool widget that I created. And I think I was an economics major, and we always use widget as just a generic term for something that is not a real product, just for sake of units. And I feel like people are actually now creating real widgets that sit on your desk and don't do anything useful at all. So Bobby, I'm glad that brilliant minds like yours are out there helping to create this world where it's physical products that are of immense value, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in everyday life. I think that's really cool. And I've got to ask you this. It's such a joy having an innovator such of yourself on this show, because I think you have unique insights into the tipping point of AI. And I think that us as everyday consumers, we've started to see some of this. 12 months ago, I remember how many conversations everybody was talking the conversation of, oh, you got to learn how to prompt AI. People who know how to prompt AI. And here we are in Q1 of 2026. And I feel like everyone's just kind of accepted the fact that AI is better at prompting AI than we are. And so a lot of people now just ask their large language model of choice, hey, here's what I want. How would you prompt you? And I think it's such a cool approach. From your perspective, and obviously as the founder of Transfigure, how is there that tipping point where AI helps AI get better at things? What does that look like behind the scenes?
The world of prompting AI is evolving so quickly. I feel constantly behind, as I'm sure you do, and probably a lot of the listeners do. OpenClaw, and then varieties of OpenClaw have come out. It's like, especially being in Silicon Valley, it's truly a pressure cooker of AI, which is why we're starting the company now, because this is the right time. I want to say that agents are very helpful in solving those problems, which otherwise you'd have to solve, very programmatically, create your own workflow on how to get, in the instance of Transfigure, creating so many different workflows from scratch and then trying to get them to combine at the end. These agents and their ability to create in AI's ability to create a harness for agents and then run all those agents by itself is truly a powerful approach. And, that's some of what we do. In two different ways. We have two parallel paths that we're running for our MVP, which we're going to launch this summer in June. And they are fully agentified. That really is the power that we're working with here, is we have like agents as running parallel paths and then recombining things at the end. I want to give an example though of like the way that we prompt Transfigure. There's many competitors, like maybe one new competitor to us a week, doing similar things, but not in the exact same way. And again, I come back to the point of like, we're a mechanical engineer designing something for engineers to send to, say, factories, or engineers to send to machine shops. We're not creating stuff for web or content creators or like widgets, like you were saying. We're creating stuff that people are going to pay for because, people want their part and they want it bad. They'll pay for it pretty bad. Between like $50 to like $150 is how much like a shop might charge a customer just to expedite a part. So it kind of gives you an idea of how much people would be willing to pay just to get their part in hand so they could fix their machine, fix their car, do something in the home, contract, for contractors, construction workers, etc. We're prompting the model not just with text, because text is very verbose for a description of a 3D object. How do you get every feature in there? And it's just so using prompting with text alone. We actually really rely on an engineer, or really any human's ability to draw pictures. Anybody, even, my kids can draw a picture of a car and I immediately know what it is. I might have to guess a little bit about okay, did you really want this headlight here or not? But, you draw a picture of a car, you can understand what it is. And even with one basic dimension, the proportions of the rest of the drawing, especially for engineering drawings, are completely, proportional. Even with one dimension on a drawing, we can actually infer the dimensions of the rest of the part. So being able to prompt a model with a sketch is the most powerful way that we can actually describe to our team of agents in LLM and our AI model, like, hey, I have this design for a bracket. Here's one dimension. Now go handle the rest of it. And it creates a part that an engineer would have created himself in SolidWorks or CATIA or NX, whatever CAD system you would choose. And it's ready for production. So that's really the value add of how we prompt the model with the most natural input possible, which is a sketch. Of course, you can add additional embeddings like, it should be made of aluminum. It's going to be 2 millimeters thick. And I want to design it for CNC process. Those things are also possible, but the sketch alone is such a rich piece of information. That's why we really rely on that as the input. And that's the real power of Transfigure.
And Bobby, hearing the way that you said that, it slipped out of your mouth a few times about the fact that engineers especially are going to be incredibly empowered when it comes to using a tool like Transfigure in their projects. And I want to call that out because you've made it very clear, and I fully appreciate the fact that Transfigure is for everybody, and this is something that will transform the world for everyday people. But I think that the fact that you alluded to it a few times about engineers especially are going to have a leg up in there, I've seen it. Let's call out Midjourney. Midjourney, which is an AI art creator. And I hopped in there, and Bobby, for the first time in my life, I felt visually creative. I was creating all of these incredible posters and graphics and images and characters and logos and all these things that I've personally never been able to create before. Then I hopped on YouTube and found people who are visually creative, who are painters, and the way that they prompt Midjourney is light years ahead of anything that I can do. They are fully using everything they've ever learned from inside the art world. What's your perspective on that? I would imagine part of the way you guys build it, especially being engineers yourselves, I would imagine that it's inevitable that engineers will have a leg up in here. So how do you balance that out and measure it?
That is a super good question. Again, and that goes to a little bit about how we want to enter the market. So, when I started this journey almost 1 year ago, it was a competition between my machinist coworker and me, and we decided, AI is supposed to take our jobs. Well, can it really? Let's try it out. So he took ChatGPT, I took Gemini, and we just got it to try to make like a step file. A step file, again, is like the universal interchange format for CAD data around the world. And we tried to create a step file of a cube, and it really suffered through it. It couldn't do it, but the file that came out was suspiciously close to being a step file. And that's kind of what kicked me off. I'm like, well, let me just train my own model. So I trained my own model to make cubes, step files using AI, and that was fine. But no one's going to buy that. But then how about we just decide to make really everything else in the world? And that's when I said, okay, well, we just need to train on way more data. But then even it took a while to wander in the desert and really understand who is going to buy this. And I had that question from several VCs. So are you the customer? Is your coworker the customer? Who actually wants to purchase? Who will pay money for this? And we found that there is a very special spot pain point in America, which I don't know if I can fully talk about our kind of secret customer, but this type of customer receives 2D drawings, and instead of being able to action them, they just drop them on the floor. They're like, I got so much other work to do. I got all this 3D data. I'm going to work on this 3D stuff first, but this 2D stuff, I just can't take the time to deal with it. It turns out 20% of that customer's pain is 2D. And when I heard from one of our customers, if you could just turn this 2D drawing into a 3D part so I could just quote it, that would actually allow me to get a little bit more business, and I could say yes more often. So we said, that's exactly what Transfigure is trying to do. So let's work together. And so that became actually our entry point in the market. It wasn't actually engineers that ended up being the sweet spot for our MVP or even initial paying customer. As an engineer, I realized I'm horribly picky. I'm the pickiest person. I'm the last person probably to adopt unless it's 10, 100, maybe 1,000x better than I actually consider paying money for and using it in my daily work. But this other part of the industry where there's such pain that they can't even get the work done at all, this is really where we're going to turn 2D drawings into 3D objects such that it could be quoted and manufactured right away, and that's our entry point into the market. So that was how we approached it. Later on, engineers will certainly get the power to use this tool as we've established our beachhead with production of parts going from 2D to 3D, but that will come sometime later. We're focusing on very we're overfitting to this particular customer to make sure we can enter the market and demonstrate traction.
Yeah, Bobby, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Also, I think that there's a big lesson in there for all of us in our own businesses is the fact that it sounds like you guys weren't married to and set in stone on your initial idea. You said, hey, let's listen to the market, especially, the biggest blessing of all for any and every business is to have an actual paying customer. So huge kudos to you guys for recognizing, hey, here's the market needs, here's the direction we're going to move in. Doesn't mean you're going to move in that direction forever. That's what I think is really cool, and what it takes a long time for entrepreneurs to accept the fact that we don't have any of the answers. Our customers and our markets, they're the ones that have the answers. So kudos to you guys for tapping into that and listening to that. I knew time would fly by with you, but I want to squeeze two more questions in. The first is a bit of a personal question because you and I were talking off air, and it's very clear to me, one, not only how ambitious you are, but two, how much your family's path to this country and how much your worldly perspective factors into the way you view business, the way you view your legacy, the way you view your work. So as a fellow first-gen American, the son of immigrant parents, I think that it's really important to also spotlight how much that has played into your entrepreneurial mindset, which is obviously just an example of your personal mindset as well. So, Bobby, how has that impacted your journey?
Yeah, so I was born in Dallas, Texas, but my parents are from Hong Kong, and they went through a lot of trouble to get to the country. And my dad did his PhD at Texas A&M. My mom went to school, nearby Texas A&M, and they met in the middle of nowhere and hit it off. But I think that some of that spirit of like, okay, toughing it out, struggling and putting in hard work to get to the end result, I think, something that me and, even especially my brother and I like really saw firsthand. I lived, my parents were in the oil industry. So we actually moved to Indonesia, New Zealand, Malaysia, China, really all over the world, for my parents' job, and taught me a lot of resilience. As a kid, I guess it's not too difficult to just hang out and do stuff. But for my parents, I could tell, like, yeah, they really they have to put in a lot of effort. It's not like living in America where everything's easy. So I really got to see them flex their perseverance muscle. And I think that's really led into like how I view a lot of my life as well. It's like being put in a new situation is not scary. It's actually pretty exciting. I really enjoy having things change and being able to react and come up with a plan and execute the plan and test the result and like see, oh, did that actually work? Or if not, okay, well, what am I going to do differently next time? So I think a lot of that kind of immigrant parent mentality really carried over to me and my brother as well. Turned us into comfortable risk takers, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, I love that. Comfortable risk takers. Those sometimes easier said than done, but a very important mindset to adopt. And I love the fact that you're right. Yeah, flexing the muscle. I talk about reps so frequently on the air is that when you were a kid, you didn't even realize you were flexing that muscle. You didn't realize how much you were becoming more adaptable day by day, but every move made you more adaptable. Every move made you more resilient. So huge kudos to your parents and shout out to the family values that you carry with you in everything that you do. And Bobby, along those lines, I want you to keep that entrepreneur hat on to answer this final question, because I always ask it, and that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and as one of us, as a fellow entrepreneur, what's that one thing you want to leave them with today?
Yeah, I've had to think about that a little bit. I would say that the idea that you don't have enough money to start a business, I think is not necessarily true. I bootstrapped just a little bit of my company, but even with that little bit, it set off like a tidal wave of like, well, here's everything else that we're going to do. And, start to talk to people about the business, and I think just, you start to talk to people about what you're doing and like, build up this rapport with different people and try to find angel investors. I used to be, I think, very risk averse and scared of spending my own money. Like, oh, this is all I got. Like, how am I supposed to I gotta keep this. I gotta keep this safe. I can't spend it. I don't want to invest it. I put it on the mattress. But I think actually that can be, that can feel like a real thing for some people. But I guess I would encourage other founders and entrepreneurs to not be afraid to use the little wealth that you think you might have to generate more wealth. I think we're called to do that as humans. It's like a parable of the talents sort of thing. Don't bury it in the ground, but actually use the things that you've got to create more wealth in the world and something that you're passionate about. And I think that's what I would say. Don't be afraid to use what you got.
Yes, I love that advice. I think that is such an important call to action for all of us to really step into that in whatever ways and whatever skills and talents we have, and really where we feel like we can serve others. I would argue, so I started my first business all the way back in 2008. I was only 19 years old, and my startup budget back then was $120, because that's what it took to buy a domain name and then get set up on Blogspot, was the platform way back then that I created my first website on. I would argue today that either you only need a budget of $20, thanks to ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude and all of those, or even just free. Start serving people and charging them for your expertise and building meaningful things such as you have done, Bobby. You are such an inspiration. I think what you're up to with Transfigure is incredible. I'm so excited to see it change the world in so many different ways. So for listeners who want to find you online, drop those links on us. So where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, you can find us online at xfgr.ai, short for Transfigure. And come check out our website. And I think you'll see a lot of progress over the next 3 months as far as what we're going to do with AI CAD in this new world. So thank you.
Heck yes. And listeners, you already know we're making it as easy as possible for you to find that link down below in the show notes, no matter where it is you're tuning into today's episode. You don't have to memorize anything. If you're on the go, have no fear. We're putting the link below. You can click right on through. Otherwise, Bobby, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Brian. Great to be here.